Can you explain why is sitting bad for us and what we should do to prevent the negative effects?
Sitting is the new smoking. If you sit all day, you're not using the muscles and you are quite sedentary. It's highly inflammatory.
Why do so many men have low testosterone these days, and what are the main factors that lead to low testosterone?
The whole world is honestly set up in a way that is not conducive to good testosterone. Our lifestyle is doing it. Our diet is doing it. The chemicals we're exposed to are doing it. Polyester underwear, like that can actually essentially sterilize.
Meat tends to be probably the most well tolerated by our gut. What I see typically is that people switch over to a carnivore diet, and some people see dramatic, life-altering reversal of chronic lifelong diseases, which is really what's exciting to me with the diet.
The low-carb diet made from real foods should also be beneficial for women in menopause and perimenopause.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those women find it the most difficult.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Achieve Life podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different. We have so far recorded 37 episodes this year, and 4 of them were extremely popular with you, which is why we decided to pick the best bits out of these episodes and compile them together to remind you of the best health tips that you should have heard from your doctor, but you probably didn't. In this episode, you will hear from Dr Avi Charlton, Dr Jessica Turton, Dr Shawn Baker, and our dear ambassador and coach, Jake Dolechal. The topics they will cover are why you should eat meat and why carnivore diet and meat are the best for your gut health, which are the lifestyle habits that can make or break your health and how to go about it and fix it, why you should be eating more to lose weight, and what is the best diet for women in menopause and perimenopause. And lastly, why so many men today suffer with low testosterone and what needs to be done to improve it. This episode is packed with amazing information, and it's full of great guidelines and health tips that you really need to know and follow. I'm super excited about the topic today. I actually saw your Instagram post on the topic, and it was such a great summary that I thought we need to have a podcast about it and make people aware how the modern lifestyle habits damage their health and lead to inflammation, weight gain, hormonal imbalances, poor sleep, fatigue, lots of different symptoms that people might not realize are linked to how they live their life. And it would be great to explain each of the 5 and give people some advice on how to minimize this negative effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all just focus on one thing, or we just focus on the food, but we don't realize it's all interconnected. There's so many things in our lives that are detrimental and causing us inflammation, making us the mitochondria not function properly. So realizing and recognizing that they've all got contribution and we can work small steps to improve our lifestyle, then that'll be really important.
Yeah, amazing. So I just bring out the 5 main bad habits you named, and then we discuss them in detail. So it was late night screen time, sitting most of the day, constant snacking, chronic stress with no recovery, and minimal daylight exposure. So let's start from the top. What happens when we stare into the screen late until the night?
Yeah, the screen is actually so damaging. I really try to get off the screen. Sometimes it's work, like podcast, or sometimes we can only meet at night. But sometimes just telling my patients and followers that the screens are actually really damaging. The blue lights, the flickers, and the stress that's coming out of the screen. Our human body isn't designed to be looking at screens all day. We're designed to be outside in the nature and getting the proper UV spectrum. And if we're working during the day and we're working at night, and it's just too much screens, too much artificial lights, and that's really inflammatory, damaging our whole body. So I think it's really important to be getting off the screens in the evening. And if you're not getting off the screens, using blue light blockers is a little bit better than still on the screens. And having some relaxation time and downtime, and even breath work, mindfulness, a bit of time before bedtime, then that'll be ideal. But yeah, that's something that I would like to work on as well.
Yeah, so but explain to us before we get into the more practical tips, how does the blue light affect our hormones? I know that it affects melatonin, it affects cortisol. Can you dig a little bit deeper into it to explain what is the actual effect of the blue light other than just damaging our eyes?
Yeah, the blue light. If you have too much blue light in the evening, our body doesn't make melatonin in the evening. And if you have we need the UV lights, the normal daylights, and we need to go outside during the day to help us make melatonin at night. So sunlight exposure will improve melatonin build-up for sleeping. Blue light in the evening will reduce melatonin. It will disrupt our circadian rhythm, and it will as you said, it will increase our cortisol, make us stressed, and it will disrupt sleeping. So we're not calmed down, we're just working non-stop, and increases our stress hormone as well. So there's a lot of damaging effects from blue light and screens in the evening.
Yeah, so in this case of scenario, when our melatonin is suppressed from the blue light and our cortisol is elevated, that impacts our sleep. So I think it mainly impacts our deep sleep. So what happens when we don't get enough deep sleep? What happens in the body?
Yeah. The deep sleep is really important as a clean out process. Our body's got a lymphatic nervous system, so it's the body's way of cleaning out waste products. We need the deep sleep and the REM sleep. So the non-REM sleep is a deep sleep, and the REM sleep is like the dreamy sleep. We need a good proportion of both of them, and sometimes we do have some awake times in the middle. So it's like a book with your sleep cycles. You've got to follow the rhythm of REM sleep, non-REM sleep, and have the correct proportions of each of the cycles and the proportions to get the right balance. Then we can restore, regenerate, and our body can clean out waste products. So if you don't get enough sleep, you get tired and you're not cleaned out all the waste products that your brain builds up. It's quite detrimental. You don't feel refreshed.
And you get more hungry as well, right? When you don't sleep properly.
Yeah, that's right. If you don't sleep properly, you can't regulate your emotions and cravings as much. And it's harder to control your cravings. It's just a vicious cycle if you don't get enough good sleep.
Yeah, no, I've read that, sorry to interrupt, but I've read that if you are inclined to have a chronic disease, which most of us do with age, having even like training 1 hour really hard in the morning or in the evening doesn't prevent the risk if you sit for most of the day, especially if you have inclination to diabetes or metabolic syndrome.
That's right. So we suggest constantly moving around and getting some breaks. And I work as a GP, so that's not too hard because I go and get a patient from the waiting room and walk out. And I do sometimes do exercise snacks, as I saw on your post that you do some squats, 10 squats on the hour every hour. So I actually set my timer on my phone, and 9 o'clock I do 10 squats, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and then 12 o'clock. Try to do it every hour. Sometimes I'm busy and I pause it and then maybe I come back to it. But still, if I do it 2 or 3 times a day, it's better than not doing it at all.
It really works. I started doing it because I worked most of my life as an exercise physiologist and trainer. And so I was always moving around. And then when I started working more at the office because of Chief, I started to feel the effect on my health. I've gained a little bit of weight, I got a little bit more sluggish, started to have a little bit more injuries and things like that. And I was convinced it's from the sitting. So I started reading about it, and then I read that study. That study actually said that you need to do 10 squats every 45 minutes. But I think 45
Yeah.
minutes is hard to track. So I'm like, I'm doing 10 squats every hour. I walk after every meal or do 100 squats after every meal. And I'm feeling so much better. And I made everyone in the office to do it. And they don't really want to do it. But then when they do it, they're like, yeah, I feel so much more awake. I'm like, yeah, because it's even just the blood flow into your brain. It does
Yeah,
make
yeah.
such a big difference, and you're not so stiff. Like, I just hate sitting. I think it's horrendous. And as an exercise physiologist, like, I know how much it affects your posture, because your glutes and your back gets really weak, your hip flexors get tight, and then you end up looking like Mr. Montgomery
Yeah.
Burns. You're like hunched up
Yeah,
and you have
yeah.
sore neck, sore lower back. It's terrible. So definitely, I think this is one of the very important ones, because people think these days they're going to go to the gym and smash themselves before work and then they find to sit all day, but that's not the case,
That's
is
right.
it?
Yeah, no. I decided last few days I'm going to change it around, and sometimes I do squats, 10 squats, and sometimes I do some jumps, and sometimes I
Yeah,
do some lunges just to swap it around and
yeah,
keep it interesting.
100%. It's something different. Yeah, I love it. Anything. Or even just walk around the block or anything, just any movement rather than sitting, right? So I think the
Yeah,
main thing is that it obviously improves our posture, but also it helps to control our blood glucose, right? And insulin.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're not going to sweat it up because you're only doing 10 squats. So
Yeah.
you can do it anytime. I was cooking a meal and then I had oven gloves on and I had a tongs on my hand, and I thought rather than just going to the phone and see what's happening in socials, I can just do 10 squats. Is much better than checking my phone again.
Can you please explain to us what is circadian rhythm and what is the circadian health and living in tune with your circadian rhythm, as you just mentioned?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I did mention it to a patient and she had no idea what I was
Yeah.
talking about today. So what happens is we're not paying attention to our circadian health as much as we should, because our body runs on a 24-hour clock following the sun, and we should be following what the sun does. Because of our modern lifestyle with lights and indoors and work, we're getting away from this 24-hour rhythm that our sun sets us up for. So ideally, we get up according to the sunrise, and then when the sun sets, we dim our lights and go to sleep. But because we're working sometimes and it's dark in the winter, we get up and then we turn the lights on, and the lights isn't in tune with the spectrum of the sunlight. So that is not as good for our eyes. It doesn't give our body the right signals. All our cells in the body operates on this 24-hour clock, governed by a part of the brain called suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain. So this little bit of the brain governs the whole body, that regulates our whole body 24-hour clock. So we should try and optimize this 24-hour clock in our body by listening to the sunlight, getting up in sun and looking outside into the sun. And in the middle of the day, if we can get outside and get our eyes exposed to the sun, minimizing blue light exposure on the inside, and reducing, we're getting back to what we talked about in the beginning, reducing blue lights in the evening and going to bed at dark. That is the ideal circadian rhythm, which I think it's something for everyone to work on.
100%. So that's the light exposure, but the part, as you mentioned, the part of the circadian living is also adjusting your food to the day and night cycle. So what is the circadian eating? Can you explain?
Yeah. Circadian eating, we really should eat when the sun is out. So when it's daylight, we eat. When the sun sets, it's not time for eating. So maybe in winter now, we should be having dinner a little bit earlier. And you not eating when it's dark and in the evening at night gives your bowels a bit of a rest and telling all the cells in the body that it's time to have a rest and have a sleep, and the gut as well. And having solid meals and avoiding snacks, that also helps to tell our body that these are hours that we should be regulating, operating according to our rhythm, the 24-hour clock that our body pays attention to. So our body is very clever, and it listens to this 24-hour clock, the circadian rhythm. And we should be honoring it.
I think so. I definitely feel better when I live like that. But before I say something about my experience and ask you a question, I just wanted to point out, so the circadian eating is pretty much intermittent fasting that's in tune with the sunrise and sunset, right? So does that mean that in the summer we need to fast shorter than in winter? Because the days are shorter in winter, so we have shorter window of eating. Is that right?
The days are longer
Days are shorter
in the
in
summer.
winter. In winter,
Yes,
the days are
in
shorter,
winter.
so we need to fast longer in winter. While in the summer, the days are longer, so we need to fast shorter. Is that right?
Yeah. I think so, because in winter we tend to get more sluggish, we're not as active. So we fast longer. We're actually balancing that we have longer time that we're fasting, then that might balance out that we're not as active because we're staying indoor a bit more and we're not exercising as much. So that might be nature's way. They're trying to regulate our weight, and we don't put so much weight on in the winter.
I definitely feel good like that, but there are lots of experts these days saying that fasting that long, like let's say the winter fast when it's dark at 5 and it's not light until 7, they say that it's not healthy for women. I don't tend to agree, but what is your stance as a doctor?
I don't agree either. I think it's a personal experience and what you feel works well for you. And I don't think there's a blanket rule for all women shouldn't be fasting or all women athletes shouldn't be fasting. I think it's your own preference and how you feel about it. I've heard some studies saying that if those who fast and those who don't fast, then the athletic performance, there's no difference. So I myself, actually, I fast 16 hours most days, regardless if it's summer or winter.
Me
I do
too.
a workout first thing in the morning most days. Then I don't eat until midday.
Yeah.
I don't even have a protein drink before or after my workout. And I'm not hungry until midday. And I can fast until dinner if I want to.
Yeah. So what would you do to distress if you, let's say, you work long hours, you come home, you have kids, you don't really have time to go for a walk? What would you do to distress before you go to bed?
I would do breath work. So that's what I would do. Take a few slow breaths. If you do 1 minute of slowing down breathing, that's amazing. If you do 5 minutes, that's even better. So even if you just consciously notice your breath and slow it down to breathe in for 5, breathe out for 5. So that becomes 6 breaths a minute. So because it's 10 seconds for one breath, 6 breaths a minute, it's much slower than usually most people breathe 12, 14 breaths a minute. So if you do 1 minute of slow breathing is amazing, and then, or you can do 5 minutes, or you can just practice mindfulness, notice how your body's feeling, and acknowledging it that you are stressed and just consciously slow down. It is easier said than done, the more you do it, the more you practice, the more you'll get better at it. And in the world, we call this coherent breathing, is breathing in for 5 and out for 5. And I say you can do it anywhere. When you're driving, you can do this. You can pay attention to your breathing, in for 5, out for 5. And when you're trying to settle your kids, you can do that. And then if you're angry, you can tell yourself to slow down your breathing. And that's just a tool. Then you can just dig it out of your head anytime you are stressed or in need of calming down. That's really easy.
Yeah, that's great. I know you teach breath work. Do you teach your patients breath work, like in your consultations?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, I do. One of the most common thing is to just ask them if they breathe in with the nose or mouth, and then if I notice them mouth breathing, just switching them to nose breathing can really help them slow down and even engage their diaphragm more. And sometimes just being aware, that can encourage mindfulness, and slowing down, making their breath quieter. Quite often that can improve their anxiety, improve their stress. And there's other things that can improve, even ADHD, they can slow down their thoughts, even snoring. Some people who snores, some kids have coughs that lingers on after a cold. If I tell them to breathe through the nose, that might help. And I've had women that just coughs and coughs, and because they're mouth breathing, because the cold air is irritating the airway. Just switching them to nose breathing, that helps their chronic cough for no reason. So it's quite powerful. So just simple advice can get them on track.
What happens when we don't expose ourselves to the light? What are the repercussions?
Yeah. That's a bit like what we talked about before with our circadian health. We need to get outside and get our sunlight to give us energy, because the sunlight gives us the full UV spectrum, and we actually really need energy, not just from food, but also from sunlight. And if we're sitting inside all day, we're not getting sunlight. And even if we drive through the car window, we're not getting the full spectrum of good sunlight. So I try to make a point of opening the window or the sunroof, and I try to get outside. But it's hard in winter because it's dark when I go running in the morning. Yeah, but just getting outside to have a break for like 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the midday, and ideally before sunset another 5 or 10 minutes. That'll be the ideal. And if you do some squats and lunges, then that might get some activity going as well.
Squats in the sun. And the sun is mainly important for the vitamin D, is that right?
Not just the vitamin D. Everyone thinks sunlight is vitamin D. They think they can just take the vitamin D in a tablet. The sun has so many other things that improves inflammation, gives us energy. I can't tell you all the chemical names. If you ask Max Galhane, he can tell you.
Oh my God, Max was saying, I have to say, to interrupt, at the Regenerate event, that we need sun so much for healing that even people with melanoma need to go in the sun without sunscreen to heal from the melanoma. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's right. So it's not just vitamin D, but the sunlight has so many other anti-inflammatory effects and regulates circadian health, that certainly measuring vitamin D is a good proxy to tell us whether you're getting enough sunlight or not. But even if you have good vitamin D, you should still get out in the sun. And even if you take vitamin D tablets and getting good numbers, and you're not getting out in the sun, you're still not quite getting an optimal health.
Okay, so to recap these 5 habits and what to do with it. So ideally, if we want to implement some simple hacks into our life to be healthier, we would get out in the sunset during sunset and sunrise and sunset without the sunscreen.
Or sunglasses.
Or sunglasses. Stay away from the screens at least 1 hour before bedtime and don't use bright lights in the house. Use red light. Eat only when it's daylight and have 5 hours space in between meals, no snacks, no milky coffees and things like that. Do squats or some kind of movement every hour instead of just working out for 1 hour and then sitting all day. And try not to stress, be mindful, and do some breath work and breathe through the nose.
Yeah, that's my teachings, and
That's
I've
your
put it
guide.
all in a book.
And it's pretty simple. All of this is absolutely for free. Doesn't cost anything. Why do so many men have low testosterone these days, and what are the main factors that lead to low testosterone?
The whole world is honestly set up in a way that is not conducive to good testosterone. So we could look at our environment, we could look at endocrine disrupting chemicals and compounds we're exposed to in air pollution. We know that they're going to have an effect. We could look at our food supply, we could look at pesticides, we could look at even particular foods, estrogenic foods, things like soy and flax. We could look at EMF, we could look at cortisol. I mean, I'm probably going to come back to cortisol quite a bit, I suspect, in this episode because it is so important. But from a stress perspective, whether that's perceived or real, like how much higher stress levels today? Like we live in a world where people want our attention 24/7 and technology is set up in a way to vie for our attention. And like cortisol levels are just significantly higher. How much are people sleeping? Like we know that post the pandemic, we know that sleep has gone down. People are sleeping less. People are working later. Like testosterone levels were bad before that, let alone like people aren't even sleeping properly anymore. So anything that's contributing to higher cortisol is going to have a huge detrimental effect. So that's a big one. Then we've got, I mentioned food supply, but we've got types of foods people are eating as well. And if people are eating highly ultra processed foods, or they're even just overdoing it on healthy foods, if they're in a caloric excess and they're gaining body fat and they're obese or overweight, like that's going to start to have an effect on aromatization and how we convert testosterone. So when we kind of look at our world, it's like, well, why are testosterone levels dropping? It's like, well, why wouldn't they? I mean, our lifestyle is doing it. Our diet is doing it. The chemicals we're exposed to are doing it. Like we're doing it to ourselves as well. Like it's just everywhere.
Do you agree with me that ultra-processed foods, soy products, herbicides and pesticides, and seed oils all can contribute to having low testosterone?
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be individual variants here as well. So even like you mentioned soy, even if we look at soy, if we look at the research on soy, it's so controversial because people will be like, well, look at the studies, there wasn't a change, it didn't affect testosterone. But if you look at the individual response to things like soy, it actually changes really dramatically. So for some people, absolutely, it can be a huge factor. For other people, will it necessarily be such a big factor? Maybe not. So it's one of those ones, like for me, I don't consume soy. Do I know that it's going to be an issue for me? I don't know it, but it's not a chance I'm willing to take because I know there's such big individual variance to it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. How about sugar? How does that affect our or men's testosterone level, not our?
Sugar would be one of those ones where, and even if we talk about like carbohydrates in general, it's one of those ones where it largely comes down to that individual. So just because someone's eating high amounts of sugar, and that could be like natural sugar, it can be refined sugar, it depends on, you know, obviously the food source, but just because someone's having high amounts doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have a really detrimental effect on testosterone. In the same way that, you know, someone could be following a high carb diet, low carb diet doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an issue, right? I think what we need to look at when we look at nutrition is for who. Who are we talking about sugar, or who are we talking about high carb or low carb? And that's where we're going to see I guess, more actionable or valuable information, right? So if we have someone who's obviously prone to blood sugar issues and they've got metabolic issues anyway, or they're more prone to it anyway, and they're overweight, and then we start feeding them a high sugar diet, we start feeding them a high carbohydrate diet, we know that that's going to worsen things. But if we have an athlete, someone who's lean anyway, maybe they're, I don't want to say endurance athlete because there's kind of issues with that anyway when it comes to testosterone, but if we just have someone who's doing like fairly normal levels of activity and they're lean and they're insulin sensitive and they're consuming sugar, that's not going to have as negative systemic effect as on that other individual. So for me, from what I've seen from sugar in terms of longer term outcomes, I'm not that concerned purely based on the sugar. I'm concerned based on the individual. When it comes to ethanol or it comes to alcohol, I do think that's really quite damaging because we've got decent data on how it affects Leydig cells. So basically, it's going to damage your ability to produce testosterone in the first place. So it's not just going to have an acute effect, it's going to have a chronic effect as well. The interesting thing with that is if we look at what's doing it, so ethanol converting into acetaldehyde, and that's damaging Leydig cells and testes, that's the same compound we see in yeast. So yeast and candida produces that same stuff, acetaldehyde, ethanol. So if we have someone who's got a yeast overgrowth, a candida overgrowth, which is incredibly common, they may not even be consuming alcohol. And we can start to see these same negative impacts on Leydig cells, testosterone production. We also tend to see an increase in prolactin in these cases as well, both with alcohol and with acetaldehyde and yeast. And prolactin tends to have an inverse relationship with testosterone as well. So someone might think, oh, either I'm only drinking once a week on the weekend, it's not going to have a big impact, or maybe they're not even consuming alcohol at all, but they could still be having these negative impacts going on.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, next question. Which vitamin and mineral deficiencies can cause low testosterone, if any?
Definitely a few. So my starting point when I get a client who comes to me and they're like, hey, tests have shown they've got lower testosterone. What do we do about it? I want to cover bases. So the first base I'd cover is make sure there's no nutritional issues. And sometimes there will be, I'd say majority of the time now, because there's so many other factors, it's often not just going to be a nutritional issue. But if I just want to cover that base and make sure that's not playing into it, the big things for me would be like fat-soluble vitamins, so vitamin D especially, but if I can just cover all fat-soluble vitamins, it's going to be better. So vitamin A, E, D, K. We can cover a lot of those with things like cod liver oil, for example. Obviously, good quality fatty meats will have a lot of these as well, but organ meats, liver is going to be the best there. So fat-soluble vitamins are going to be important. Magnesium is going to be very important. Most people are way under consuming magnesium, especially if they're active athletes. Almost certainly need more magnesium. So magnesium, I'm probably just going to supplement off the bat, to be honest. Zinc, there's pretty good research around zinc, especially when we look at the fact that, and I'm assuming a lot of your listeners are probably like more active or potentially athletes, and we know that there's a higher probability or possibility of things like exercise-induced intestinal permeability. If people are doing a high amount of activity, a high amount of, say, endurance work or things like that, then they're more prone to leaky gut, basically. And we know things like zinc carnosine, a compound or a supplement that works very well for helping with leaky gut. So that would be one I'd love to use with athletes, especially because we're covering the zinc component, we're supporting the gut lining as well. So zinc, mag, fat-soluble vitamins, a little bit of research around selenium. I don't always use selenium, but that can be an option to look into. They're probably the big ones for me. Obviously, I want to make sure someone's consuming enough fats in the diet. Again, generally, people who are a little bit more health conscious are probably aware of this. Like this, I don't think there'll be a lot of people listening to this who have slashed the fats, eating 30 grams a day or something like that. But if that's you, if you're listening to this and you've gone like super low fat, okay, look, that's not going to be conducive to good testosterone. We need obviously cholesterol. That's going to convert into pregnenolone, into DHEA, into testosterone. So we need that. We need saturated fats. But they're the main nutrients I'll be looking at.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next question touches on nutrition, but also environment, and that's endocrine disruptors. Could you tell us which endocrine disruptors are the worst for testosterone? Where can we find them? How can we avoid them? Just like a quick summary on endocrine disruptors.
Yeah, so obviously these are compounds that affect the endocrine systems, the hormones, right? So that's not just always going to be testosterone. It can be other hormones that maybe they have estrogenic effects that could mimic estrogen. And there's so many compounds we're exposed to that do this. And I mentioned like before, that can be even stuff in air pollution. It can be stuff in our foods, so like plastics. Obviously, people are going to be aware of things like BPA. That got a lot of airtime a few years ago, but we're still exposed to plastics all the time. And I guess some real basic things, like maybe someone's never even considered this before, right? So some super basic things we could do to limit our exposure to some of these compounds would be just never, ever, ever cook in plastic. So don't heat anything up in plastic. Don't put your food preparation in plastic and put it in the microwave. Don't use a plastic lid. Don't use plastic wrap in the microwave. Just don't use plastic on your food, right? Like that would be one simple thing. But people are usually switched on and they're not doing that. But there's a few other ways plastic's making its way into our food. So even things like tea bags. tea bags can release huge amounts of microplastics. So if you're drinking tea consistently, like, it might be worth hopping online, have a look, Google it. There's websites that tell you, hey, these are the companies that don't use plastic in the tea bags. There's plenty of good options nowadays, right? So that would be one. Plastic water bottles. Like, people think about their food sometimes, but they ignore the water bottle. They just buy a new, Mount Franklin water bottle from the gym every day, and they're drinking out of plastic. They leave it in the car, it heats up. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to leach into your water. We know that. Things like polystyrene cups. Like, we know that the foam cup literally weighs less after it's been used. Why does it weigh less? You've consumed some of that. So getting takeaway coffees, even takeaway coffees in paper cups, it's still lined with petrochemicals. So the food aspect is probably the biggest one, and it sounds overwhelming because it's like, oh my god, that's everything, and it kind of is everything, but at the same time,
what about the skincare and household products and hair care and all those
and luckily for guys, that's probably slightly less of an issue. Like, they're not using as many cosmetics as females are going to be using, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got studies on teenage boys using like body wash, and that essentially causing growth of breast tissue. So that was like lavender scented body wash. So, I mean, lavender I would put in the same boat as soy. Like, it's also very estrogenic. So I personally don't use anything that's lavender scented. I wouldn't use lavender candles, lavender soap, anything like that, essential oils. But yeah, absolutely. Like, what are you applying to your body? What are you using in the shower? What are you spraying? And I don't want to come across like all doom and gloom and be like, well, you can't do anything, because you can. Like, you can use natural deodorants. There's stuff out there. And like, hell, if you want to use a cologne, like, occasionally put some on the outside of your shirt. You don't need to apply it to your skin. Is it still going to potentially have some negative effect? A little bit, but it's going to be a lot better than being straight on your skin. So there's compromises you can make. I guess I'd start by saying, hey, where you're exposed to plastic, what can we do to stop that? Because even things like plastic curtains in your shower, like, you're in a hot area, there's steam, you've got plastic in there that's being exposed to the hot water, like, that's still going to be an issue, right? So go around your home, where's there plastic that I can minimize that? You can't eliminate it. You can't eliminate plastic in the life we live, right? But what can you do to limit that? Even plastic clothing. I mean, if you're wearing nylon, you're wearing polyester, like, you're wearing plastic in your clothing. That's going through usually a hot wash at some point. And, like, that's going to leach. Like, you're wearing that if you're sweating, you're wearing that in hot conditions. We know that effectively, like, polyester underwear, like, that can actually essentially sterilize people. Like, we've got animal studies on this. We've got human studies showing the effect on hormones and wearing plastic clothing. So, you're going to the gym, you're doing everything healthy, and you're wearing your 100% polyester underwear and leggings and skins and whatever. Like, that could be having an impact.
That's crazy. I didn't know that about the underwear.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
nuts.
Yeah, there's some interesting animal studies, and then there's some 1 or 2 human studies as well. So definitely, like, underwear, change it to wool or to like cotton or bamboo. Any natural fiber is going to be better. Part of the issue is the heat retention of the polyester, so that's why it had a negative effect. And we see that in other things that cause high levels of heat. So even like cycling, for example, or saunas, but that's, I guess, slightly different issue again. What else? I guess, I mean, like pesticides, that's a bit of a difficult one.
So do you think it's worth having organic fruits and veggies, organic meat, to avoid the herbicide and pesticide?
In an ideal world, I'd say, look, if you're not peeling the thing you're eating it like it was exposed to pesticides the way you're eating it, it would be good to get organic. I do normally suggest that to clients who are concerned about fertility and, their partners are trying to conceive. So if you're having like a banana, not the end of the world. If you're having potato and you're peeling it, not the end of the world. But if you're eating strawberries or blueberries, like, it would be ideal if we can get that organic. You can create like a wash, like even bicarb soda. I don't know if you've seen the study on bicarb soda. They compared a few different washes and what was best for removing pesticides, and bicarb soda did very well.
I have, but I just think that the herbicide and pesticide soaks into the pores of the fruit.
Well, so does plastic. Like, have you seen that research on produce having plastic inside it? So it's pretty concerning. So, it's one of those things where we can't eliminate exposure.
Yeah, well,
all we can do is
avoid
mitigate.
It, just minimize it where you can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Meat's a bit easier. So I do think it's it's a sad reality that the way the world is going, like, if you want to avoid being exposed to some of this stuff, you end up having to kind of limit how much plants you're eating, to be honest. Like, you just, if plastic's inside a plant now, like it's inside a banana, what are you going to do, you know? So I do think that it's a bit safer if we're talking about meat.
Our gut is about the size of a tennis court when you look at the actual interface, and our skin is designed to keep things out. I mean, it's waterproof. I mean, whereas our gut is designed to bring things in. So really the biggest interface we have with the external environment is through our gut. That's why 70% of our immune system is approximately located in our gut. And so when our gut is damaged, injured, not working correctly, and food does have a role there for sure, then it leads to downstream effects. And so inflammation, autoimmunity, all those things I think stem from initially with our interaction with the gut, or mostly. I mean, there's other things that impact it, but I mean, gut has a big role here. So by, fixing that, and I think that of all the foods that are available to us to eat as humans, meat tends to be probably the most well tolerated by our gut. I mean, you think about it, we hear a lot about the microbiome, right, which primarily lives in our colon, the distal part of our small intestine, or our large intestine rather. The lower half of our intestine is where our microbiome lives. You literally don't need a microbiome to digest meat. I mean, there are people that don't have colons that have had it removed for whatever reason, and they live fine. They live long, healthy lives, because they don't really need that microbiome. You think about that because people say, "Oh, it's so important to feed your microbiome." Well, there's literally people that live to 90 and 100 years old without basically any significant microbiome, at least in the colon where people are talking about these things. So what I see typically is that people switch over to a carnivore diet, and for the most part, not everybody, but most people see significant improvements in their health. And some people see dramatic, like life-altering reversal of chronic lifelong diseases, which is really what's exciting to me with the diet. And, it may take a while. It might take, for most people, I tell them 3 months is a good trial. If you can stick it out for 3 months, you probably are going to see a benefit. And if you don't see a benefit, then hey, go do something else. I mean, I think that's a fair way to look at this thing. But I think it's just the gut is probably where many diseases start. I mean, I think that's not a controversial statement. I think it's not controversial to say that nutrition impacts our health and impacts our diseases. And I think by fixing the nutrition, because our nutrition is so incredibly bad, particularly these days, and particularly in Western countries where we're just eating so much ultra-processed garbage, I think that's really causing all these. I think it's significantly contributing to many of the diseases we face today.
Yeah, 100% agree. So I have a few questions about this. So you say that eating just meat reduces inflammation. Is this because of reducing the inflammation in the gut, and then that reduces inflammation in the whole body?
I do believe that's probably where it starts for sure. I think that's probably a big part of it. I think that I think there's a number of things that are going on. One is there is a reduction in probably gut hyperpermeability. There's some great work that a group in Europe has done looking at carnivore diets and gut permeability, and they found that using something called PEG, polyethylene glycol 400, that people going on a carnivore diet would see dramatic improvements in gut permeability. It would normalize the gut permeability. A gut is normally somewhat permeable, but it becomes too permeable. It becomes hyperpermeable in some situations when you're exposed to certain medications, certain foods. And the diet, the meat-based diet, the carnivore diet, is really good at fixing that particular issue. And I think that's probably where much of the benefit is coming from. It's also the fact that the nutrition is just better. I mean, we're just getting more bioavailable, more usable, more appropriate nutrition that we need. You think about, why do we eat in the first place? I mean, what is compelling us to eat? Well, obviously we need nutrition, but what is in that nutrition that we need? Well, we know essentially we need protein, we need amino acids. We know essentially we need certain fatty acids. We know essentially we need some energy. We need some vitamins and minerals and arguably water. Outside of that, we don't really need anything. I mean, there's things that are conditionally beneficial or conditionally harmful, depending on what's going on. And so I think, eliminating the harmful things, maximizing things that are essential, is why this diet has been so efficacious for so many people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you say we don't need fiber, which goes against what most health practitioners advocate. But when I was studying nutrition, they're saying that we need a fiber to feed the gut bugs for short chain fatty acids production, and that the short chain fatty acids production lowers our inflammation in the gut. Do you agree with that, or is it a misinformation?
Well, I agree that the action of certain bacteria on fiber does lead to the production of things like butyrate, which are short chain fatty acids, which can have a positive effect on the gut. But do we need that? Can we get that some other way? Yes, we certainly can. There's a nice paper that Dr. Tommy Wood and Dr. Lucy Mailing and one other author, I'm forgetting the name, published about 2 years ago looking at the metabolic flexibility of the gut, and they show clearly that there are many ways to produce short-chain fatty acids in the gut. And protein, amino acids can do it. We know that things like beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is the principal ketone body that we see circulating, can also do that. It can quickly be converted to butyrate. It's a very reversible, easy reaction. So we don't need fiber to get that effect. We can do that otherwise. Certainly, for some people, fiber is actually detrimental, and we see that. There's a nice paper looking at rheumatoid arthritis where they see that higher fiber diets actually exacerbate rheumatoid arthritis and make it worse. I think most of the proposed benefit of fiber, really, I think it's probably, and it's mostly seen in kind of epidemiologic studies where they look at populations and they see that, people that generally eat a more fiber-rich diet tend to have less heart disease. They tend to live longer. They tend to have less cancer. And that's true. But I think the reason really for that is probably because it's a marker of diet quality. And, if you compare a low-fiber diet, where is that mostly leading to? It's usually coming from like acellular, highly processed, broken down things like flours and sugars and starches and things like that. And when you change that out for some fruits and vegetables and maybe whole grains, you're going to see a net benefit. But that is very different from saying, not eating junk and cookies and equating that to a carnivore diet. It's not the same thing. A carnivore diet is completely different. You clearly don't need fiber. I mean, I've gone basically 8 years, and I know people that have gone as much as 65 years on this diet without significant fiber, and they do just fine, and they're healthy, and they're happy, and they have normal bowel movements, and so fiber is, I think, conditionally beneficial. I think if you compare it to the standard Western diet, yeah, it's probably helpful to do that because it just moves out some of that other garbage. But to say that it is absolutely essential, if that were the case, I would long be dead. And I'm not. I'm still here, believe it or not. So, some people would say that I'm sick and dying or something like that. But,
No, you're a weapon. You're the best example. No, thank you for explaining this because I think from what I hear, that's people's main concern that stops them from turning to carnivore diet or ketogenic diet.
Well, it's one concern. And the other thing is, you're thinking about, well, what about vegetables and phytonutrients and things like that, right? Well, interestingly, and there's a great study that Stefan Van Vliet and Fred Provenza did back at Duke University looking at the phytonutrient content of beef. And actually, beef has a lot of phytonutrients in it because when the cow eats the vegetation, most of which we can eat, so it has a more diverse diet than we do, it is actually accumulating phytonutrients within its tissues. And they happen to be very bioavailable to us. And so there's a nice paper looking at grass-finished beef and phytonutrients. It's published in 2021, I believe, or 2022, that shows that. So you can actually get phytonutrients from eating meat. You don't need fiber to produce short-chain fatty acids. You can get that from just eating meat too, from the protein and from the butyrate or the beta-hydroxybutyrate.
Why do we need cholesterol? Is having high LDL cholesterol bad? And then also, if you can explain what you said in your book about the fact that low cholesterol is linked to dementia, depression, and cancer. So if you can give us a few main points about cholesterol.
Yeah, well, we think about lipoproteins, LDL cholesterol, which is a lipoprotein which contains cholesterol. It has a number of roles in the body. And one of it has a significant role in the immune system, so fighting off infections and immune surveillance for things like cancer and things like that. And so we know, in fact, there was a study that literally was published 2 days ago looking at people with, say, for instance, asthma. People with asthma, the people that live the longest and have the lowest death rates are the people with the highest cholesterol. And the people that have the highest death rates are the people with the lowest cholesterol. And we see that over and over and over again in numerous populations. And some people will say, well, low cholesterol is associated with reverse causation. And so when we get really sick, our cholesterol falls because our immune system is using it up, right? And there's probably some truth to that. But it doesn't really account for why we see people with high cholesterol living longer. They haven't really been able to satisfactorily answer that question based on reverse causality, which they often like to do. I think that, in my view, does cholesterol have a role in the development of atherosclerosis or cardiovascular disease? I think there's probably some decent argument that you can make that, yeah, it does. Now, I will say that I think there is a lot more nuance than we previously thought. Probably many people with high cholesterol do not develop heart disease. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. And we're starting to figure out why that may be, and we're starting to figure out who those populations may be. So I don't tell people to ignore cholesterol if it's high or low, because low can be a problem. I mean, there are people that, there's at least association of studies that show that people with very low cholesterol are more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to be violent. They're more likely to be depressed. They may be more likely to have infections. They may be more likely to have certain cancers. So you can't, there's problems on either side of the scale. But if you're high, then it just means you should probably get more information, find out why you're high. I mean, we know that, for instance, in the low-carb state, based on a really nice study that my friend Adrian Sotomoto did back in January, we looked at a meta-analysis of 41 studies, and they found that the biggest predictor of high cholesterol in a low-carb setting, and a carnivore diet certainly is a low-carb setting, is going to be leanness. So when you're very lean and you eat very low carb, odds are your cholesterol is going to go up. Now, the question is it bad in that situation? And the answer to that question is we don't know for sure, but it looks like there's more and more data that point to the fact that it may not be. And I'm referring to Matt Budoff's study, which was just released a couple weeks ago, looking at people with very, very high LDL cholesterol that have been on low-carb diets for many, many years, and they just don't have high rates of heart disease. Their heart disease was at least as low as somebody with low cholesterol and perhaps even lower. So, it's one of those things where it depends why it's high, depends what else is going on. I consider it a dependent variable, which means that, if we look at, like, I want to build a fire, what do I need to build a fire? Well, I'd like to have some wood. I might have something to give me a spark. And I want oxygen. I need some fuel to burn, right? Or an oxygen-rich environment. If I don't have those things, like if I have a bunch of wood sitting there and there's never a spark, you can have all the wood in the world and it's never going to catch fire, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen. So you got to have. So I consider that like cholesterol. If you got a lot of cholesterol around, but there's not enough of these other things going on, it may not lead to anything. Now, I think we do have to have some caution here because, let's say you have low triglycerides and high HDL and low inflammatory markers and good control and no diabetes and great blood pressure. Those are all good things. And probably the high cholesterol may not be the issue for you. But what about if you live in a polluted area and you're constantly breathing in, irritants and maybe that's enough to kind of mix with that high cholesterol to be an issue. So I do think we just have to surveil things. So if you're going to be someone with high cholesterol, at the very least, I think you should get some imaging, right? I mean, you should get like a CAC score, coronary artery calcium scan, or coronary angiography if you want to go that extreme and get that much detail. But, and it depends on your age. I mean, if you're 20, it doesn't make sense. But if you're over 40, that's when you start looking at these things. So, I think it's like I said, I just don't think cholesterol is quite the boogeyman everybody makes it out to be, but we can't just totally ignore it either, like some people would suggest. I think just because a lot of people may listen to what I say and do things based on it, so I just urge some level of caution. As the evidence comes out, it may be where like you can just totally ignore it. We may find that out at some point based on what else is going on. We're not quite there yet. But I think we're heading in that direction. So I think for now, get some imaging, get a baseline image, check it up again in a couple of years, see what's going on. Depending on I can, everybody's got a unique situation, but that's generally how I'd approach that.
Most times when people think about weight loss and dieting for weight loss specifically, they think about eating less and moving more. We've heard the kind of like calories in versus calories out. And like, even when you speak to a lot of healthcare professionals, academics, professors, and then the everyday person, everybody's pretty much in agreement that if you eat less food, you lose weight. But what I've learned through personal experience and working with clients, looking at the research, is that's not necessarily true. And even if it is true for the short term, it's not true for the long term. And there are a lot of side effects of losing weight with that approach, even if it is successful. So then I started looking at, well, what else is possible? Because, if that's actually not an effective way to lose weight, and that's like the standard that everybody thinks, you should do and does work, then what else can be done? And I started looking into this idea of, your metabolism and ways that you can actually get your body to burn more energy. And interestingly, one of the most effective ways to get your own body to expend more energy every single day is by eating more food. And so then we have to think about, the right types of foods to eat more of so that we're supporting general health, we're increasing nutrient status, but actually improving the metabolic rate. And since applying this approach in my practice with my clients, what we have found is that individuals who have been dieting for years and decades on the standard eat less approach suddenly start eating more food, and not only do they actually start losing weight in a healthy way, but they also get better energy levels, improved mental clarity, increased strength and performance when they're at the gym and doing physical activity. So there is a huge amount of benefits, and I'm extremely passionate about spreading awareness that eating less and moving more is not the only way to lose weight.
That's great. So let's just unravel this. So by eating more, do you mean eating more volume or eating more calories? Because I can eat more grains, but it's less calories than if I had one chocolate bar. So what do you mean by eating more?
That's a good question. It's a great question actually, because so many people probably think that, and I really have never clarified that before. But in terms of eating more, we are talking about eating more calories. So more calories, and it's those calorie dense foods that are real whole foods and nutrient dense foods that we do want to increase. And that takes us to kind of like another side of dieting, where you have like this group of really health conscious people that eat a lot of vegetables and fruit, plant-based foods. And so they eat huge volumes of food. Like, I have a lot of vegan clients who just, it's like a full-time job with how much they have to eat through the day. But unfortunately, those foods are really low in calories. Just by definition, those plant foods are very low in calories, also very low in nutrient value. And so that's not really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about eating more, because we know to increase the metabolic rate, we actually have to consume more digestible calories. So foods high in protein and fat specifically.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So how does it technically work? If someone eats more energy than they require, wouldn't they physically put on weight?
That's the thing. We're not necessarily talking about eating more energy than what is required. We really need to kind of clear that up, because with the eat less, move more messaging, most of the time, people who give out that advice are not asking how much you're eating currently. So for example, someone who is overweight or struggling with their weight might be sitting down watching TV, and then like an ad comes on about how, like Light and Easy or something is recommending these low calorie diets for weight loss. And so people get this idea that they're just eating too much and they need to cut back, but it's not taking into account what they're eating now. What I've noticed is that for most people who are struggling with their weight, and it's not all, but a lot of people who have good intentions and they're trying to manage their weight, we often observe that they're already restricting calories. So they're actually already following that advice to try and eat less, right? Because it's just kind of ingrained in us that if you're overweight, you should cut back on calories. And even if they're not eating less all of the time, it's still their intention for like their good days, you know, like they're planning or trying to eat less food. And so when we talk about the eat more approach, we actually want to assess patients on an individual basis, or at least that's how I work, and find out not just how much they're eating currently, but do a pretty good estimation of what their energy requirements should be and what they actually should be burning and should be eating every single day. And we take into account like their body weight, their goal body weight, their stress levels, their physical activity levels, and muscle mass, and so on. And so when we talk about eating more, a lot of the times we're talking to those people who are already restricting and actually eating far less than what their body requires. So we're trying to teach them how much energy their body needs. And for most people, it's more than they think. You know, most people think, oh yeah, 1,200 calories a day is all I need, you know, because they're just so used to all these weight loss diets that they've heard about or they followed before. And so it's about reframing, well, actually most women need 2,000 to 3,000 calories every single day, right? Not 1,200, not 1,500, not even 1,800. They need over 2,000. Men need significant amounts more. And then if you take into account someone who's physically active and has a lot of muscle mass, you're dialing that up more and more and more. So we're not necessarily trying to get patients to eat excessive amounts of calories. We're trying to get them to meet their energy demands. And it's usually a lot higher than what they're currently eating or what they think they should be eating.
Okay, interesting. So do you actually make people to count calories?
It depends. So most of the time, no. So I'm not a fan of counting calories, and I do feel that when I work with clients, that should be my job and not their job.
Yeah.
You know, I can do a really good assessment on someone's diet and figure out how many calories they're eating and whether or not they need more. And that can be a conversation that we have so that they're understanding of that. We can work out their energy requirements together and they can really see, oh, there's a shortfall. And then when we talk about eating more food, I'm not necessarily saying, okay, get out your diet tracking app and start counting more calories and you need to hit this calorie target. What I'm more so doing is giving them like a framework that they can follow. Mm-hmm. And so generally we give patients like a list of foods, like here are your recommended sources of proteins, your recommended sources of healthy fats, and, you know, fruits and veggies and things that, you know, are going to keep your blood sugars nice and stable. And then we give them like minimum portions. So for example, I might say, okay, well at each meal you want to aim for at least 150 grams of these protein rich foods. And then at least 2 tablespoons of fat, for example, depending on how much they need to eat more, right? So you give them these minimum portions. But then another really important component of this is allowing these people or encouraging people to eat to satiety. Because if we eat to satiety, as long as we're in tune with satiety, and that can be really hard, but if we eat to satiety, we're actually listening to our body and we're not listening to a calorie target. We're not even listening to me and my calculations. We're letting our body guide us in how much food we should be eating. And this is a really useful strategy when you're eating real whole foods. If we talk about eating to satiety for Doritos or like deep fried chicken or something like that, it's not going to work, right? But if we're talking about real whole foods and we're balancing proteins with fats and any carbohydrates that we're adding, it's a really good strategy to follow and to aim for. And so that's what we encourage. We help guide our patients in what eating more looks like without counting calories most of the time if we can avoid it. And then we also use that concept of eating to satiety.
Yeah, I love that. I just think that counting calories is such a waste of mental space. I always tell people, you know, how much more time you would have to think about better things if you didn't count calories. And it's true. If you eat whole foods, you just feel full and you don't want to eat anymore. But yeah, if you have a block of chocolate, you can keep going, right? Or the Doritos. So yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Those foods are designed to bypass your satiety signals, aren't they? So like we literally can't eat to satiety with Doritos and chocolates and lollies.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there's probably like a small subset of people that can, they just eat a little bit and they're fine with that. But I would say for most people, it's difficult.
Yeah, difficult. Definitely difficult for most. But tell us, so what are the consequences of dieting when let's say you have nutritious diet, you don't eat processed foods or ultra processed foods, but you don't eat enough energy. You have like, your meat and veggies and stuff, but you're always in calorie deficit. What are the consequences?
Yeah. So the biggest issue is when people restrict their calories below their resting metabolic rate. And the resting metabolic rate is basically the amount of energy that your body needs to fuel its vital organ systems. So energy required for the brain, energy required for the lungs, for the liver, for the sex hormones, even for your skin and your digestion and all of that to function properly. Most people are so focused on weight loss and dieting and calories that they actually forget there is this fundamental reason we eat food, and that is to get energy so we can not only survive but thrive. And we rarely think, oh yeah, all those organ systems require energy. So when we talk about restricting below that metabolic rate, basically what we're saying is that a lot of people out there are not eating enough food to provide their vital organ systems with adequate energy. And so those organ systems start to function less effectively, essentially, because they don't have as much energy. So for example, if your brain isn't getting enough energy, you can experience brain fog and memory issues. Even poor focus and issues with eyesight can be a side effect. We know that mental health issues are associated with not eating enough food. So there are studies that show if you restrict people of calories, there's an increase in depression and anxiety. And there's even an increase in disordered eating habits and behaviors. We know that if you're not getting enough energy to your digestive tract, then your digestion is not going to function properly. So you may get bloating, you may get constipation, diarrhea, lots of gas, a lot of pain, discomfort. If energy is not going to your muscles, you're going to notice muscle wasting. And in severe cases, it is called sarcopenia, which is a major disease associated with an increased risk of metabolic disease and all these other issues like breaking bones and osteoporosis and all of that. We know that if the thyroid doesn't get enough energy, then that is something that's going to cause insulin resistance. It can also affect our body temperature, cause low body temperature. It's going to dramatically affect our energy levels and the way we function and show up each day. So everything in the body requires energy, but it's so interesting as we talk through those symptoms, so many people accept those things as just being like normal. Like, oh yeah, I have brain fog, I have low energy, I have gut issues. And these are things that are so common. And really what I find, like the more that I've looked into this and the more patients I've worked with, whether people are intentionally trying to lose weight or not, I do notice that most people really have no idea how much food they should be eating. And most people will underestimate their energy requirements. And I think people that are most at risk of this are sometimes the healthiest people, in the sense that they have the healthiest intentions. As you said before, they're eating all the right types of foods, but simply just not eating enough. And so whether their intention is to lose weight or not, or just experience better health, I think eating more of the right types of foods can be extremely beneficial for lots of people.
Low-carb diet made from real foods should also be beneficial for women in menopause and perimenopause because of the insulin resistance and inflammation. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those women find it the most difficult to lose weight. And oftentimes going through that stage of your life, you might not have even had weight issues in the past. Like you may have never had to go on a diet before, and suddenly you're like, whoa, I'm gaining weight and I don't know what to do about it. And it's because those hormonal changes are so significant. But yeah, a lower carb approach, eating more healthy fats, eating more protein, eating more food of the right types of foods can be really beneficial.
Yeah. So that completely makes sense, and I agree with you. But then I'm also like torn with other part of this whole equation, which is longevity, because there is a lot of research in longevity that says that 10 to 20% reduction in calories or 10 to 20% calorie restriction without malnutrition extends our health span and lifespan and prevents age-related diseases and things like that. How do you combine these two thoughts of school of thoughts?
Well, I think if someone has a healthy metabolism and they're not dealing with issues like type 2 diabetes, some calorie restriction used intermittently can certainly be helpful. And, that's why I think you need to look at this in stages, right? Like that initial stage needs to be addressing any therapeutic issues. Like if there's insulin resistance or nutrient deficiencies, like you have to follow a specific dietary plan to really address those. And they are far more important than any longevity research piece, because if you've got type 2 diabetes, there's an early death right there, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And if you have nutrient deficiencies, another early death, right? Like these things are essential for life. So irrespective of what that research says, we know that we need to address those fundamental issues first. And then once you are in this healthy place where, your metabolism has come back up to where it needs to be, it's been repaired, so to speak, you don't have nutrient deficiencies, you don't have insulin resistance or whatever it may be, I do feel like the body can withstand some calorie restriction. But I think that calorie restriction has to be intermittent. And I also feel that people need to understand what their energy requirements are before they restrict. Because otherwise we end up in that same issue that we spoke about at the beginning, where people just keep eating less, they keep doing more and more fasting or whatever it may be, but they're never actually fueling, and they're not getting that part right as well. So I think they can definitely come hand in hand, and maybe that would promote better longevity, perhaps, for sure. But I think it's not going to suit everyone, because getting to that place where you have no health issues and you don't have nutrient deficiencies, for a lot of people that's hard, and that's what they need to focus on before they start thinking about layering all these other things on top.
I think a lot of the times this information is, and all the research is also taken out of the context. Don't you think that it would be probably different for a woman in reproductive age and someone who is 80 years old? Probably the person who is 80 years old would maybe benefit from the calorie restriction and focusing mainly on protein. But if someone is 30 and they're trying to conceive a child, that's probably not the best idea. I think there's a lot of good information out there, but it's not presented well and it's taken out of the context. And that's why I just want to ask you, like, what do you think about this? Like, is the diet also very different in the different stages of life? Like whether you are growing up, trying to conceive, or you're elderly? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's important to always come back to that question is, what are my energy requirements now? And am I actually meeting those? Because that question in itself is a relatively difficult question to answer. You may need support to help answer that question, because there's not a lot of information out there about how you can kind of figure out how much energy you need. And what you do find out is that most of those like equations to help you estimate your energy requirements are certainly based on age. And they're certainly based on the stage of life you are in. So you are right. If you are pregnant or breastfeeding, or you've recently had a baby like me, your energy requirements are significantly higher. And you'll very rarely get that information, when you go to your doctor's appointments, or even if you see like dietitians that work in this space, you very rarely get that information about actually needing more energy for those stages. We also know that growing children obviously need more energy relative to kilogram of body weight, because they are physically growing. But the same is true for people who are under a lot of mental load. So I think one thing that adults often find themselves in the trap of is they say, well, I'm not growing anymore, so I don't need all this protein, I don't need all this energy, right? Like I've got all this fat, I can just use that. But that's not really true, because, if you have a mentally demanding workload, even if you're not that physically active, your brain uses a huge amount of energy. So that's something we need to take into account when we're estimating energy requirements. And that can really be any stage of your adult life. You know, a lot of people around their 40s or 50s have like very highly demanding jobs, but even people in their 70s and 80s can be doing a lot. Like I have a lot of patients, elderly patients, who are literally working more than like a full-time work person. They're like looking after grandkids, they're also running this business on the side, they're socializing, and like it adds up to quite a lot. So the different stage of life comes into play, but someone's physical and mental workload, and then also, you know, what might be going on for them in the sense if they've had a surgery recently, or, you know, as we just said, they've just had a baby or something like that. All of these things must be taken into account when it comes to energy requirements.
Thank you for listening. Let us know in the comments below what topics interest you, and don't forget to follow us.